1998 saw the release of Ocarina of Time, a landmark achievement for gaming. In the jump between 2D and 3D platforms, Nintendo nailed it with its release of Ocarina of Time, often claimed as not only the best Zelda game, but one of the most influential games ever made, selling over 7 million copies, winning various Game of the Year awards, and even earning a legendarily rare 40 out of 40 on Famitsu magazine. It was clear to Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto that they should keep going and make another game like this one. But that game after Ocarina of Time wasn't supposed to be Majora's Mask. In fact, Majora's Mask was never supposed to exist. In late 1998, Shigeru Miyamoto had a plan to get more life out of Ocarina of Time, but his idea was to make a second quest. Now, some Zelda fans may know what a second quest is, but in general, it's a New Game Plus, or hard mode for Zelda. This was first seen in the original title on the NES. The original idea was to release a second Ocarina of Time and call it Master Quest. They would then mirror the world from left to right, increase damage dealt by enemies, and remix the dungeons for a brand new challenge. Now, of course, somewhere along the line, instead of this second quest happening, we got Majora's Mask. Now, I can hear you typing away, but they did make an Ocarina of Time Master Quest, which was released 2002 on the GameCube, a few years later than expected. And even more of these ideas came to life in the 3DS remake, with its own unique mirrored and double damage mode released in 2011. So, what exactly happened here? Well, to understand why Majora's Mask exists, we need to meet some of its creators. Now, Shigeru Miyamoto was the producer heading the project, but under him were two important figures in the Zelda world, Eiji Aonuma and Yoshiaki Koizumi. Aonuma had been the lead dungeon designer in Ocarina of Time, which means he created not only the puzzles and layout, but the enemy locations within the dungeons as well. Fun fact, Aonuma had also worked on the original Zelda title, but quit because he was so bad at fighting the enemies. Ironically, here he was designing the dungeons in Ocarina of Time. So Aonuma focused on puzzles as the primary focus, not enemies, which honestly changed the Zelda format forever, becoming a vital part of all titles to come. After the success of Ocarina of Time, Miyamoto saw Aonuma as the perfect person to work on this second quest idea, but Aonuma couldn't get into it. To paraphrase an Iwata Asks interview, he had just made the ultimate dungeons in Ocarina of Time. He didn't want to mess with anything that he thought was already perfect, so instead, he secretly started working on making brand new dungeons that hadn't been seen before, and once he had a viable construct, he approached Miyamoto with them and asked if he could make a brand new game instead. Miyamoto shockingly fired back by saying, "Sure, if you can make it in a year." The Iwata interview goes on to ask how long Ocarina took, which was around 3 years. Now, of course, Aonuma would be able to reuse all the assets from the game and recycle some scrapped ideas, and thus the race was on. Just like Link, Aonuma and his team raced against the clock to create a brand new game in 1 year. They were in too deep to back down now. As Aonuma worked furiously away in his dungeons, he had to find someone to actually create the story and structure of the game. He couldn't possibly do both, and Miyamoto hadn't intended on hiring anyone to fill that role for Ocarina of Time Second Quest because it wasn't needed. The story would be the same. So it fell to Aonuma to find someone, and he reached out to Koizumi, a Zelda director on Ocarina and Link's Awakening. At the time, Koizumi was already working on another title. When Aonuma begged for his help, Koizumi replied that he'd work on the new Zelda game only if you let me do whatever I want to do. And Aonuma agreed. Koizumi had the infamous idea to create a game where Link was forced to relive a period of time over and over. The idea was to give the game depth as opposed to breadth of the wild. Instead of making a huge game, let's make a small one, jam-packed with so many details that people could play the same area for years and still discover new amazing things. Originally, Link was supposed to go through a period of 7 days or a week, but they felt that was too much, and rightly so. So they came up with a 3-day cycle. This 3-day cycle was actually an idea influenced by the German techno-thriller film Run, Lola Run, which saw a woman relive a period 3 times in order to save her boyfriend's life. When she fails, she learns something new to help her on her next run. Now, I talk way more about this in another video. It's shocking how much of Majora's Mask comes directly from this film. If you're interested, I highly recommend you check out that link, which I post below. The 3-day cycles presented some challenges, however. While it was a relatively short game, the amount of content added, including the entire mass transformation system, meant that the game was going to be much larger than originally anticipated. As such, Miyamoto ended up bringing back over 70% of the OOT staff on the project, and with it came a ton of recycled ideas from the older title. Thus, the game began to come together in this 1-year period, set to release in April 2000. But one question remained. Why was there a 3-day cycle in the first place? Why was the world ending? On August 31st, 1998, just before the release of Ocarina of Time, North Korea launched a rocket called, and apologies, the Taepodong-1 towards Japan. Though official reports say this missile was an attempt to launch a satellite into space, not everyone shared that sentiment. The real reason for the North Korean missile is its target, which is Japan, said Toshiyuki Shikata, professor at Taikyo University and a retired general from the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. Japan had been under alert for a coming missile crisis, and the team at Nintendo was not immune to this fear. Koizumi would daydream during this 2-week high alert situation where he kept looking to the sky for impending doom, and that is where the falling moon idea came from. In Majora's Mask, everyone looks to the sky in fear of an oncoming apocalypse, not from a missile, but from the moon crashing down. This eerily mimicked the situation faced by all Japanese people at the time. After the missile flew overhead, Aonuma, Koizumi, and other developers attended a wedding. A Nintendo Dream interview states, they discussed how weird it felt to come to a wedding in a situation where missiles may fall down. The fear and joy gave them the idea to inject realism into every character in Majora's Mask. From the cowering swordsman to the conflicted government officials, this paved the way to the most prolific quest in the game, the Anju and Cafe quest, where you must help reunite these two lovers for a ceremony before the moon falls. It's heartbreaking to see these characters try to share so much joy and love and happiness despite this earth-shattering force of destruction above. With the ideas in place, the story set, the dungeons created, and the side quests crafted, they needed someone to work on the art and music for the game. Now, music is an enormous topic that's been covered to death. If you want me to cover that too, let me know. But for now, let's talk about the look and feel of Majora's Mask. Art director Takaya Imamura headed the visuals for the game and had a long tenured history with the company, having designed F-Zero, Star Fox, and A Link to the Past. He oversaw the new tone of the story and made a lot of elements darker, such as designing the moon with its horrific face. Among the various art changes that he implemented, one character he created was, interesting. A 35-year-old man whose fairy has yet to come. Tingle, who was one of the only themes of this game that went on to create multiple spin-offs. I'll save that for another video though. Imamura's most interesting contribution comes from his idea to name the game. The name Majora, or Majora in Japanese, came when he mashed up his own last name with characters from the movie titled Jumanji. Yeah, that Robin Williams movie. Now that being said, I can't help but wonder if the name was also somewhat inspired by Majora culture, a pre-Columbian civilization in Brazil. Check out some of their artwork. Some of it is fairly similar to the designs we see in Goron City. And with all that said, the game somehow came together. Miyamoto reportedly offered Aonuma more time on the project, but Aonuma said no. He promised it would be released in a year, and it was. At least the Japanese version. April of 2000 saw the release of Majora's Mask in Japan, but it would still be 6 months until the rest of the world saw the game, and there was still a ton of work to do. There were tons of glitches, inconsistencies, and bugs found in the Japanese version that would be patched for the international releases 6 months later. Some of these alterations included changing the clock text from last to final to fixing item positions on the item screen. To detail all of these would require a deep dive, an entire series dedicated to this topic alone. Quick plug, check out my daily shorts. More secrets and oddities are on the way. Aside from tons of bugs being patched, one of the biggest issues was one of localization. Miyamoto had always praised gameplay first before anything else. However, this title got away from him, and as such, it was chock full of dialogue and fell to Jason Lung to translate, who was a writer at Nintendo Power. You remember Nintendo Power, right? Jason was flown to Kyoto to work at the Nintendo home base, and he was given an enormous text dump file, which was the translated text for Majora's Mask, which had been done by Bill Trennan. While translation was hard enough, it was Jason's job to take the literal meanings and make them fun for local audiences. Many concepts and ideas don't flow together due to language barriers and regional differences, making this a very delicate job. Without good localization, the whole thing could fall apart. Jason played the Japanese version with the US translation side by side and modified it line by line, meaning he would have to enact every scenario and situation at every hour of the game, making this a colossal task. It was him which first started adding the Goro line after Goron spoke, for example. One line he struggled with greatly became the game's most famous. There's 100 ways to put it, but the Happy Mask salesman famously says, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" According to Jason, he worked 7 days a week, 15 hours a day on this project with its 8,000 script pieces. He became a resident expert in the game, and after his work was done, his new English text would be the default format for other languages too, namely the PAL releases. In his diary, he wrote, My big wish is that all players talk to every character on all 3 days, wearing all 24 masks. That way, the tons of dialogue and little jokes I write for each situation won't go unread. Chances are, though, most people won't see more than 2/3 of the dialogue that was scripted in this game. Don't worry, Jason. I'm trying my best to find all these little secrets and quirks and let everyone know that you did a great job. Some of the best localization we've ever seen. It's an underappreciated job, but not here. From Aonuma's devious dungeons leading to a new game, to Koizumi's apocalyptic influences, this game was lovingly crafted in a high-pressure time. I'll end with this quote, which really cements the game as something special. When I finished creating Majora's Mask, Aonuma told Iwata, I assumed that other companies would be releasing games similar to this one, but in reality, no one did. Even 15 years after the Nintendo 64 version of the game released, no one created a game like this. Because of this, the unique taste and feel of this game seems to exist for a long time, and it has. I'm Brando. Until next time. Hey, quickly, I want to say I'm opening a Patreon. That's right, the channel, which is just me, will have its own dedicated rewards and bonuses to Patreon members, like that feel-good feeling you get for supporting my endless coffee addiction. Thank you again for everything. This is Brando out.